Welcome back to the channel and welcome to our review of the Forging Mount Scissor Action TV Wall Mount.
TV wall mount. Alright.
Glad you approve. Hey, I think there's going to be some things that you really like about this wall mount, Keith.
Okay, I'll bite. So what is it about this particular wall mount that I'm going to like so much compared to, any other wall mount?
3 things, Keith. So first is its weight capacity at 165 pounds. Second's going to be its scissor action as it collapses and expands. And that scissor action, as our third item, gives us a travel distance of up to 43 inches.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty intriguing. Let's unpack these things one at a time, shall we? So first off, 165-pound capacity. Now, I'm assuming that capacity is with proper installation into the studs and using the approved hardware, right?
Absolutely spot on, Keith. So there isn't a kit in the world that's going to let you hang a 165-pound TV off of just drywall. So along with needing to drive the bolts into the studs to a particular distance, you also are going to need the proper bolts to do that. Luckily, the kit includes all the hardware you need to install this properly.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so now let's go on to the second item, the scissor action. I assume you're talking about when it folds and unfolds, right? So tell me why is that such a big deal?
So Keith, for some, maybe it's not a big deal, but for me, it is actually a huge deal. So because of the scissor action, it keeps the geometry of the extension, specifically the motion left and right, very consistent. And we'll show in the installation video why this is such a big deal, but it's because this mount is being installed inside of a cabinet.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. It's inside of a cabinet with some defined boundaries, at least on the left and right. And I do know that a lot of these wall mounts are kind of linkages with multiple arms, and sometimes they're just a single pivot point with multiple kind of linkages in it. And for those, when you're pulling out, it dramatically wants to move to one side, or you don't have control over which knuckle between those linkages is moving. So it can be really difficult to just pull it in and out without it going from side to side also. Kind of hard to explain, but I'm hoping you know what I'm actually meaning. So the scissor action, I think, probably makes it a lot easier to just telescope it in and out, which you would need for a cabinet.
Exactly, Keith. So I might have been able to make a traditional, arm work where it's just got the single elements with the joints, but it just seemed like that scissor action, the ability to just very easily, push in, pull straight out, and not having it go all over the place was just a way better application for me.
Yeah, and lastly, 43 inches of travel. Dang, that's monstrous. It is interesting because a lot of the installations with wall mounts that you see, whether it's Best Buy or just on TV or even at people's houses, sometimes the cool thing is to have it flush mounted as close as possible to the wall. But yeah, that's not always the case for everybody. Sometimes if you're inside of a cabinet like you are, you do need to pull it out so that it's flush with the outside of the cabinets. And I have a similar situation. So I like that. 43 inches, that's a lot of travel. That's impressive. So Bruce, I understand you have a pretty lengthy installation video for us. Is that right?
I do. So, the good and the bad thing about this is I go through all the steps that I had to go through to install this arm inside of the cabinet. So I discovered that my cabinet back was not against the drywall. So I ended up having to basically cut through the back of the cabinet and then cut drywall down to the studs, and then basically insert what I'll call cleats in order to fill that out so it was closer to flush with the cabinet backing. So there was quite a bit of work, and That's not necessarily a bad thing to show people. Not everyone's necessarily going to be super interested in that, but it does show that in the real world, sometimes you run into a situation and you got to find a way to plan around it. So I do walk through all of those steps in the video. So if you're interested, it's gonna go through all of that endeavor to get to the finished product.
Oh my God. That sounds like a lot of work. I think that's why I hire handymen to do this kind of stuff. There's no way, I'll ask you, there's no way you knew that it was going to be all that involved when you started this project, right?
Yeah, Keith, I kind of alluded to it. I really thought this was going to be kind of a quick, get the kit out, drill some holes through the back of the cabinet into, the studs and just making this super easy. But once I got the TV pulled out of the cabinet and started, reminding myself of how this thing had been put together, because it had been over 20 years since the house had been built and done anything with those cabinets. It's a good lesson in, like I said, you run into things in the real world, and you just have to find ways to plan around it.
Yeah, okay. And since the video is a bit lengthy, why don't we go ahead and talk about what we liked and didn't like about this wall mount right now, and if our viewers want to, maybe they can fast forward through pieces of that installation video. And and before we do that, aren't we going to be reviewing that television as well that you have on the mount?
Yeah, Keith, we'll definitely be reviewing that TV in a separate video in a future date.
Okay, fair enough. So I know you've actually installed this wall mount quite a while ago, so we're already at a point where you can do a long-term review of it. What are your thoughts?
Keith, it really has been a great mount. It really, when I purchased it, you have a lot of things like this where you just kind of go in with some high hopes, and sometimes they meet at your expectations, and other times they don't. This has really made a big difference. My wife was adamant that we have a cabinet with doors for our TV, so that if we had company over or whatever, and we weren't, it wasn't a party to watch TV, that we could put the TV behind the doors. Well, I wanted to really, address an issue with where our TV would sit without having a mount, and that is, it was, behind where these doors would sit when they were open, right? When the doors were open, they slide into the sides of the cabinet. And the problem is the TV surface area where I could have it sit with just, being in that opening wasn't far enough out. So what it did was create some obscured viewing from the angles, the far reaches of our room. And I didn't care for it. So being able to slide the TV or pull the TV out on the mount, out beyond the doors, has been awesome, right? So now every seat in our family room has a good view of the TV.
Yeah, actually, I kind of remember that. So anything else that you disliked?
Keith, I'd have to say the only thing that I didn't like is at the time was probably the price. It seemed like it was a little more expensive than a lot of the other mounts, but it also had a lot more functionality than they did. I purchased it for about $150. I saw currently on Amazon it's running about $140, and I even saw a $25 coupon that likely is going to be long gone by the time we get this episode out. But if you keep an eye on it, it might be something you can get a discount on. But even at full price, I now that I've used it, I'd say it's definitely worth it.
Wow, so $150 down to $140? I think the Biden administration should really be evangelizing this, given all the inflation that's happening. I kind of remember at the beginning of the Biden administration, they were bragging about on a 4th of July that the price of a hot dog went down by 25 cents. They should be talking about wall mounts. This is $10 cheaper. It's amazing. Let's go ahead and show the installation video.
Before I get too far into installing this, I did want to illustrate that scissor action. So if you notice, you get kind of a true straight up and down with that scissor action. And again, it's a little difficult to lift this way. It's a little easier when it's mounted against a wall. All right, so you can see this is, inside of the TV cabinet. This would be, a top-down view. And so if you want to push the TV back into the cabinet or push it closer to the wall, you simply place it down like this. and you can tell that it's moving relatively flat or even. There's not a lot of, jockeying back and forth that has to take place. That's really the action that I was looking for. So again, to kind of answer the question, how wide does this get? Let's take a look at this real quick. So this goes to about 40.5 inches. This really, this is going to be about as far as I can push mine down in the cabinet. I have about 40 inches of clearance, so I won't quite be able to go this far in, but that also is at 15 inches away from the wall, so I don't need to go that far. I've really got 25 inches to the beginning of the cabinet, which is right here. So let's take a look, if that's going to work for my cabinetry or not. So let's push this closer to that 25 inches. Let's see, I'm at 22 here, and now this is 37.5 inches wide. So plenty of space to get this into the cabinet far enough and be able to close the doors past it, and yet not be towards the front of the cabinet. Again, the beginning of the cabinet is up at 25 inches or so. So just wanted to show you some of these little details. These are the same considerations that you would have to look at if you are using a cabinet, or even if there's any other kinds of obstructions around that would be visible. So just making sure that this is going to be the unit that works well for my cabinetry before I start putting any big holes in the wall to mount this into that cabinetry. All right, I'm going to prop the TV up just a little bit for a second here so you can see this while we're still here and not upstairs. So this is the hardware to attach to the TV. This goes on the VESA mount openings, and then it will be attached to the hanging arm. So let me flip this over to the right way. So this has got a slot to connect to the wall mount arm itself, and then you will connect this to the appropriate hole openings, getting that so that it is really evenly spaced between the two openings, and then you can attach it here. You also could, if you needed to, maybe create some clearance in order to avoid things like outlets and where you'd have the arm mounted. And then the outlets in the wall, for example, which I have in my cabinets, you may have them on your wall where you're planning on mounting this. And that's obviously a consideration, that you make sure that you have the outlets so that they are accessible, not being blocked. You're not crushing any cords, creating any potential fire hazard in that process. But this is how you mount the TV to that arm, and then you hang this from the wall mount. So you'd actually attach the hardware first, get the arm positioned where you want it, and then you can hang the TV on that arm, and it's got a secure screw down here to keep it from being able to accidentally pop off of that mount when you don't want it to. So next, we are going to work on getting the hardware attached, getting the opening verified to make sure that I understand where I have to position the arm in order to create the clearance that I need for the electrical outlets, because my electrical outlets and an outlet for cable back in the day when we had cable, those are in the wall, and making sure that I position this so it's working around that. And I do know where the studs are, because when we were building the house, I actually took photos of inside of that cabinet and where those outlets are positioned in respect to the left or the right hand side of each of those outlets. So I do know where those are positioned so that I can make sure that I hit studs. And you do want to hit studs. You do not want to try and hang, this TV might hang off of drywall okay, although it's still kind of pushing it. That mount itself will rip drywall completely out. It is that heavy. So make sure that you are using a stud finder if you don't know where your studs are specifically, and make sure that when you do drill the holes and put in the anchors that you are hitting those studs appropriately. I thought you might appreciate seeing where the TV and the arm are going to get mounted. So as I was explaining, here is our existing opening. Our existing TV sits on this nice stand that a buddy of mine, James, built for us so that we could have our center channel in the center at the appropriate height for listening. And these are the doors I was explaining that we want to keep the use of. So when my wife wants to disguise the fact that we have a TV in here, these doors will get opened up and we can close that off so that the TV is hidden, and then they slide back in the way. But you can see they don't go all the way back in the cabinet, and the TV is currently recessed. And so these far angles on left and right really have some spots in our house where they get blocked. You can't really see very well the television because this is back so far. So having the arm installed is going to give us the ability to bring that TV up towards the front of these doors and eliminate those blind spots for the TV, and yet allow us to push that TV back in the cabinet, get it out of the way for when we don't want the TV visible. All right, well, pardon me for not being on camera here other than my hand, but I wanted to point out a complication for me, and certainly it could be for anyone that has a cabinet that this is going in. So my particular cabinet, I sensed that this was kind of, weak sounding in terms of it didn't sound like there was anything behind it. So I did take off the outlet covers, both for where there was some cables coming in for this center channel speaker, as well as on the electrical outlet, because I wanted to see and make sure that if I started to drill a hole here, that not only would I hit stud, but also that this backing would be against something solid as well. And I don't know if you can see this very well, but there is actually a gap there on the from the wall to where the back of the cabinet starts, and it appears to be really about an inch, almost an inch and a quarter or so. So that is obviously going to be something that I have to address. And so my thought is, what I'll do is I'll put in a spacer, something to give it some support. This is where the stud is on this particular side. And so making sure that the back has something to support it. Basically a furring strip is what we're gonna in effect be putting in, so that I don't crack this cabinet, pull the cabinet back off the rest of the cabinet, and really create a whole bunch of damage in the process. And I'll check out the electrical outlet side and see what I have to do on that one as well. But it'll probably be something similar. It's just a little bit different configuration over there. Let me just swing that over to the outlet. As you can see, the outlet itself is actually flush mounted, and so I think they put a basically an old construction outlet box in the back here. There really didn't need to be any support, and then since this really just needed to screw into this, and there's not a lot of pressure on there, they actually I didn't even have a box that was put in that position. Certainly would have the option of putting one in if I wanted to address that. So anyway, that is one complication that I'm going to have to work around for this installation. So that's going to slow me down a little bit as I get the right furring strip for both the left and the right hand. All right, so I skipped showing you the taping part of this exercise, but I have cut 4 pieces here. The depth that I need for the wood is basically 2 times this plus the piece of paneling that we pull out of here. That should give us roughly the depth we need to hit the stud. So where I originally measured, one of the things I wasn't taking into account is I do want to take the drywall out of there, because I don't want to sandwich this wood with some drywall, and then the force that's on that drywall probably would be fine, but really just kind of being over engineering on the situation gives me wood all the way to the studs, and I'll actually glue the 2 pieces together and then probably put some glue also on the stud. So this cleat will have screws as well as the glue on it. So here we go. This is pretty uneventful in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, this is the one I have to be the most careful around, because I've got this. Actually, I'm going to tape this, I think, out of the way a little bit, just to give more room to work with. So, probably should have thought of this sooner, but this way I can kind of get this a little bit more out of the way and keep this a little safer in the grand scheme of things. There we go. That I like that a little bit better. So, both cutouts for the cleats are now completed. So to give you a visual here, maybe now that more's been taken out, these 11-inch cleats that I've cut will go in here. I'll actually double stack them. I'm going to glue the two sets of cleats together and then use a piece here, and not so much for the cosmetic piece of it, although it is nicer to, if you do see around any of that you've got this matching wood piece, but really more about I need that extra 1/4 inch that this material provides. So it kills two birds with one stone. I have both cleats done. And so what I've done is created those blocks of wood that I described. This is going to fur things out from the studs that you can see exposed now in the back of the cabinet. I've got a screw in the bottom of each one. I'll actually take that out once I have put the screw in through the top and drilled that into the stud part way. These are really just to keep the block of wood from sliding back into the cabinet accidentally. I don't think there's a lot of risk of that, but better safe than sorry. So I will use this to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. I will screw the top part in. I'll also be gluing the wood cleat to the studs that are exposed now, just to give them some extra hold. These are really long screws. These are 4-inch screws. So with the 1.5 inch or so of space that I'm traveling here, that's going to give us a good 2 inches into the stud. So that should be some good grip for these. And then the bolts that are going to connect the mounting hardware into all of this, I believe, are a good 3-inch. So they'll have 1 inch of bite into the studs plus the 1.5 inch that we have in here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so and I did mark these left and right because they need to be offset enough from the side in order to roughly get the center of the stud. So I want to make sure that I've got that positioned right, and I do need to put some glue on there, so that's all going to fit. Now that I've dry fit it, I will put some glue on, and we will be on our way. Alright, now I need to take this other screw out so I can pre-drill this and swap bits out. I just realized I can hot swap my bit. That'll make this a little faster. Alright. And now I can put in the screw. There we go. So that'll get some additional strength once that glue dries. May even be stronger than the screw, but should be plenty. We're going to just repeat the same thing on the other side, and I'll probably just skip filming that since it's going to be the exact same thing. I skipped ahead to what I thought would be more interesting. Again, all I did was take the cutouts that I made, put them over the studs. It's doing two things. One, if you do kind of catch a glimpse back there, you're going to see the same color wood and not the natural pine of the stud or the birch hardwood that I used for the cleats. So both of those are now installed. Again, it's pretty trivial. I just drilled some holes, used some finishing nails to put those in. They're really also acting as the last 1/4 inch of furring out that we needed in order to get that depth from the stud to where we're going to be putting in the mounting hardware. I have the template mounted in the spot where the mount is going to be positioned, and I have leveled it using my level. The kit does include a level if you don't have a small one handy, so I chose to use this one. This one's kind of nice because it is lit, and in this cabinet, that being lit is a benefit. So the next step is, now that I've got the template mounted and it marked off where 3/4 of an inch from the sides on both sides is at, 3/4 of an inch because the studs are 2x4s, which actually have a width in the wall, that surface of 1.5 inches. So the center of that is going to be at 3/4 of an inch. And the instructions, I want you to use a 7/32 drill bit and drill to a depth of 3 inches for the lag bolts that it has. And so let me grab one of those quick. Here is the bolt for putting the mount in. Because I have a stud installation and not a masonry installation, I will be using just 4 bolts. So they'll be at the corners here. And that does because there is a long channel if I need to slightly position where the mount itself ends up getting placed on here in order to avoid my outlet on both sides. I can position that slightly, and it should still be level following the template because of I would just be sliding horizontally, not making any kind of vertical adjustment. And then of course, before we tighten the bolts, we'll double check the level so that when we tighten it, we keep that level. There is some adjustment on the front end of the mount. You'll see that once we get to that stage, but you can adjust the level, the tilt, and that ever so slightly. But it's always good to start off as level as possible so that you minimize any kind of adjustments you have to do later with the mounting hardware itself. Okay, I have my 7/32 bit installed. I did measure this to just slightly deeper than 3 inches of depth, so that the amount of bit I have showing here is going to give us 3 inches if I go all the way to the cullet on this. And so I am ready to start drilling. Move this out of the way so I don't knock it down. And again, it's going to be important to keep this level and square going in. So I might block your view just a little bit as I'm doing this, but you know, I think this isn't really a drilling channel. It's you know, really an overall tech channel, but this just happens to be a step that we have to take. So and then I'm going to let this bit cool down before I try and take it out of the drill, because right now I bet it is extremely hot. So there we go. We have our 4 holes drilled into the studs through the cleats that I put in. And so those will be the 4 places that our bolts will screw the mounting hardware in. So next step is going to be to, I think I'm going to clean this up just a little bit, because once I get this arm in here, it's going to be very difficult to get up there and clean that, because I'll have that arm in the way. So next step is going to be cleanup and then actually installing the hardware, and then we'll get a chance to see how it works. I'm probably going to have to modify these outlet covers, both on that side and definitely the electrical outlet cover on this side, because I know I'm not quite flush here with the cleat. I thought it would end up being exactly perfect, but I think this wall might have moved in just a little bit since it does not have anything supporting it. So that's not really a problem. You know, you can see there's some flex there. So that's going to be something that is just kind of is what it is. But as a result, that outlet kind of sits a little bit wonky, and I think it's going to end up hitting this metal piece. So I'll just trim that off a little bit with a saw and make it so that it's against that metal piece. You really won't see that again because it's going to be hidden behind the... You're really not going to see that because it's going to be hidden behind the TV, and it's going to just kind of blend into where that mount is, even if you were to be sticking your head back there. I got my daughter to help get me to this stage. This is definitely a 2-person job, getting this held up and getting to the stage where you can bolt it to the wall. She didn't want to be on camera. And so we did that off camera. What I discovered is just the amount of torque it takes to get those bolts driven that deep into the wall was more than my cordless driver, and I think the batteries are getting, you know, to be a little bit on the weaker side of things. was not enough to sink them completely. We're obviously deep enough in that right now this is at least temporarily being held up with little to no weight on it other than the weight of itself. And so I grabbed my corded driver so that I can get these sunk the rest of the way. So I'm going to very carefully tilt this around, finish driving these in. I think that I've got it positioned left to right where I want it. I could always loosen it and move it. Turns out I'm not going to have to shave the outlet cover, I don't believe, on the left-hand side, and we'll see what I end up having to do on the right. Get this out of the way a little. But I'm going to go ahead and put this the rest of the way in. Excuse me if I'm quiet, just because I'm trying to keep my focus, and there is a lot of torque that's required to do this, and so make sure that I've going to do this in a way that does not injure myself. So if you're old enough, you've probably seen one of these. If not, what I've done is resorted to old school. So this is just an old-fashioned ratchet socket set. And so I'm using good old-fashioned ratchet to drive these lag bolts the last bit that they need to be driven. Okay, so that side is tight. I'm going to flip this arm over this way a little bit, get it out of the way. Now I can drive these bolts the last bit of the way. Okay, so that is tight. What I'm going to do now is just verify level, and if I need to, I'll back some of those out a little bit. And that's not horrible. Could be just a little. Those are nice and tight. And let's give you a preview here. So again, from a scissor perspective, here's why scissor approach to extending. So you can see as I can go. Actually, that's a little too deep. There we go. So now I can still close the doors, but what it's going to allow me to do is bring the TV to a viewing area, and really I'm not looking to get any further than to the doors. So now we have the full viewing angle of the TV itself, not constrained by the doors. So that's the beauty of this mount. It can extend, if we wanted to, significantly further beyond the doors. I don't know that that's going to be a good look or not. And then when we don't want the TV visible, we can literally push it in, open up our doors, and close them. So that was really the goal here, is get that TV up, able to be pushed in, pushed out, and give it some clearance over this center channel, which you may have seen when we first did the tear apart. But this center channel will sit right here, and I'll mount the TV in a way that allows the TV's bottom to be above this line. So hopefully everything that we've done to this point has facilitated that, and we'll be finishing up the last stages in just a minute or two. Pardon me for being off camera, but I just wanted to show you the back of the TV. So we're going to talk about a couple things here. So let's talk about the rail set. So you can see the VESA mount screws where those openings are. So we'll just point those out again. There's 1, 2. And I measured the clearance. And so on the back of the TV where this mount needs to be positioned, in order to make the clearance for that center channel, what I need to do is I can have no more than 13 inches of distance from the notch in the, I'll just turn this will be easier. So that notch represents the top of that mounting plate that the TV is going to sit on. So from the top of that notch down to can only be about 13 inches or so, and have the clearance and a little bit of play on there. So what that means is when I measured it out, bottom of the TV on this setting on both the mounts that would put it at right about 13 inches or so. So that should be our setting. So that is what I wanted to show you for the mount. I selected the correct screws and grabbed the washers, so I have those ready to go. One recommendation I'm going to make for you is that you hand tighten this with a screwdriver and do not use either an electric screwdriver or a corded or cordless drill to put these in. You don't need that much torque, and you potentially damage the unit with too much force on it. So I'm going to recommend that you just hand screw these in. It should be a simple job, not a hard one to do. And that will help protect the TV.
I decided to record a voiceover since the audio was actually cutting out here. So what I'm illustrating is towards the bottom of the rail, there's actually some mount screws that hold the TV in place. At the top, that is the lip that the TV mount sits on. And then on the bottom edge, that is where you install that set screw, or actually two set screws that keep the TV mount in place. And that keeps it from bouncing around. So once you get the TV put onto the mount, that is where it sits. So once I get the TV onto the mount, I actually have to adjust the way it's sitting, slide that over ever so slightly. Once I get that onto the bottom rail hook, I'm going to be able to use the specialized tool to put in that two set screws that keep the mount from falling off of the rail. So here's a close-up view of that set screw, and using the tool to screw that in. Sorry about the focus here, it does go in and out of focus, but basically once you get those screws screwed into a level that keeps the TV mount from being able to move, you can now use the TV or the rails themselves in order to push the TV in further to the cabinet or pull it back out, and you're not going to risk taking the TV off of the mount in that process. And as you can see, as soon as you get that screw put all the way to the top of the mount bracket, then that is going to secure it and you are done. You're going to do that for both screws, and that's going to keep it in place. You'll notice that there is an opening that I'm illustrating here for accessing the HDMI and other ports on the TV. Obviously, your experience is going to depend on the TV and the location of where those ports are. After you get the TV fully mounted, you can see that each of the arms, they actually have the ability to have some cable management put in. It ships with some Velcro strips so that you can nicely affix your cables to that arm so that it does not get caught up in there. Now we're going to take a look at the overall view. It's basically set up there. There's still some cleanup work to do. Cable management I will finish later, but now you can kind of see the finished product here. And then I'm going to slide the center channel back into where that is located, and you can see that I've given it enough clearance based on what I needed for the center channel and the ability to move the TV over the top of that center channel in and out whenever I need to.
Wow, so that was really in-depth. How long did that take you to film?
Yeah, I worked on it on and off based on various tasks throughout a weekend. So it definitely took longer than I was expecting, but the finished result, you know, I'm super happy with.
Yeah, I gotta say, I did like that video of the scissor action doing its thing. I like that.
Speaking of likes for doing their thing, I think the people should give this video a like for us for doing our thing.
Yeah, and if you all want to see us doing our thing again, you should also be subscribing and hitting the bell. So there you go. If you don't see us doing this again, it's on you, because you didn't subscribe or hit the bell. It's on you. Do it.
Indeed they should. And that's all for this episode, but we'll be back for more in the future. For Keith and Bruce, you'll see us on the next episode of Dads Talk Tech.